Testing, 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 testing. We continue now at the top of Daf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zarah Daf 37b. On the previous Amud, the Gemara brought Yosi ben Yoezer Ish Tzreida, who said that a certain kind of locust is kosher, and Rabbi Chia Barami, in the name of Ula, said that what kind of locust are we talking about? What kind of grasshopper are we talking about? Susbil, the kind of grasshopper we're talking about, is a susbil, and according to that point of view, Barosho Orech, if you have a grasshopper with a long head, Kuliyal Malo Pligi Daser, everybody would agree that that is forbidden. V'hachen, over here, the machlokus between Yosi ben Yoezer Ish Tzreida and the Rabbanon is B'chnafav Chofen Esruba Al Yedei Hadachak Kamiflagi. They're arguing when the wings of the grasshopper cover the majority, but not the full majority of the body. Mar Savar Ruba Koldehu Ba'inan. One says you just need it to cover the majority, but not the entire body. That's what Yosi ben Yoezer Ish Tzreida holds. Umar Savar Ruba Demin Karbinan. It needs to be recognizable that it's covering the majority of the body, and that's why the susbil would not be a kosher grasshopper. Rashi explains, Susbil ein rosh ha'orach, the susbil does not have a long head, aval ein knafav chofen esruba, but its wings also, they don't cover the majority, liros le'inayim, when you're looking at it, if you're just looking at the animal, you won't see it covering everything, elabit simsam al yedei medida. Now, if you would measure, you would see it actually is covering the majority, but you have to measure. Hachi garsinan b'chnafav chofen esruba al yedei hadachak kamiflagi. Again, the proper text is that it's al yedei hadachak, that it covers the majority, you have to measure exactly. V'lo garsinan v'karsulin, Rashi says, don't have the text for karsulin. The hani karsulim lo chafu midi. The karsulayim, they actually don't cover anything. Shehein beis raglayim aruchin minhu arba, because those are the two legs that are longer. Those are like the jumping legs. Uvahenhu medalig. That's the legs that the grasshopper uses to jump with. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. We said above, Yal mashke be mitbachai adachan. This was the second thing that Yosi ben Yoezer Ish Tzreida permitted. He permitted the liquids at the slaughterhouse of the Azara. He said those were pure. And the Gemara says, my dachan, what does it mean pure? Rav Amar dachan mamish. Rav says it means they were actually pure. They did not contract tumah at all. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says, dachan milatame acherim. The word dachan means that they didn't make other things tameh. Avol tumas atzman yeshban, but they themselves could become tameh. And the Gemara explains, Rav Amar dachan mamish. Rav says they were actually pure. Kasavar, because Rav holds tumas mashkin derabanan, that in general the entire concept of liquids becoming tameh, that's a derabanan. V'chi gaz rabbanan tumah b'mashkin dialman. When did the rabbanan say that there's tumah by mashkin? That's by liquids in general. Avol b'mashke be mitbachai lo gazr. But when it comes to the liquids in the Azara, there they did not make a gezerah. Lo gazr rabbanan, there the rabbanan did not make a gezerah. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel says dachan milatame acherim. When it says dachan, it means to say that they're not going to give tumah, they're not going to convey tumah to something else. Avol tumas atzman yeshban, but they themselves can become tameh. And why is that? Because Shmuel, Kasavar, Shmuel holds tumas mashkin doraisa, that liquids become tameh on a doraisa level, and latame acherim derabanan. It's just that liquids conveying tumah to something else is a derabanan. And so therefore, on conveying tumah to something else, there we say v'chigaz rabbanan b'mashkin dialma. The rabbanan only made the decree that they convey tumah to something else by liquids in general. B'mashkin be'mitzbachai lo gazru. They did not make that decree when it came to the liquids of the slaughterhouse of the Azara. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The third thing which Yosi ben Yoezer Ish Tzreida permitted, v'al diyikrav l'meisa misav. If somebody comes close to a dead body, he becomes tameh. Essentially, if he touches a dead body, he becomes tameh. V'karu le Yosef Shari, and they called him Yosef, the permissive one. And the Gemara asks, as Rashi mentioned on the previous summit, Yosef asra miboile. It should say that Yosef forbid or prohibited, because over here it's actually a stringency. He's saying that somebody becomes tameh when they touch a dead body, so it doesn't make sense to say that he was being permissive in this case. V'yoden further, do'oraisa. This is not a derabanan, this is not a decree, this is a do'oraisa. The fact that somebody touches a dead body is tameh, that comes from the Torah. T'chsiv, as it's written in the pasuk, v'chol asher yigal pnei hasada v'chal cherev over mace. It talks about becoming tameh when touching a mace. And the Gemara answers, do'oraisa diyikrav tameh. And on a doraisa level, if somebody touches directly a dead body, he's tameh. B'diyikrav tar, but if somebody touches one who touches a dead body, he's tahar. V'yasu inu v'gazor afilu diyikrav b'diyikrav. And now then the Rabbanan came along and they decreed, even if you touch someone who touched a dead body, you're tameh. V'yasu iu v'ukma doraisa. And he came and said, no, go back to the doraisa. If you touch somebody who touched a dead body, we're going to say that you are pure. But the Gemara questions this as well. Diyikrav b'diyikrav nami doraisa. If you touch somebody somebody who touched a dead body, that's also Tumah on a Doraisa level. T'chsiv, as it's written in the Pasuk, V'chol asher yiga bo hatameh yitma, anything that the person who's Tameh touches is going to become Tameh. So that cannot be the proper explanation either. And so the Gemara continues and answers, Amru Rabbanan Kameh de Rava, the Rabbanan said in front of Rava, Mishmei de Mar Zutra Brei de Rav Nachman, in the name of Mar Zutra, the son of Rav Nachman, Diyomer Mishmei de Rav Nachman, who said in the name of Rav Nachman as follows, Doraisa on a Doraisa level, Diyikrav b'Diyikrav b'Chiburin, let's say a person touches one who's touching a dead body, and you're touching the person at the same time that that person is touching the dead body, that's a Chiburin, that it's attached, then Tumas Shiva, then the person is Tameh for 7 days. If you touch that person who's touching the dead body all at the same time, you're going to be Tameh for 7 days. Shalo b'Chiburin, but let's say it's not b'Chiburin, meaning you're just touching somebody who became Tameh Mace, but you're not touching him at the moment that he's touching the mace. So then Tumas Erev, so then it's just Tumah until the evening. V'yasu inu v'gazra, then the Rabbanan came along and they made a gezerah, a decree, afilu shelo b'chiburin, even if it's not b'chiburin, meaning even if you're just touching the person who touched the mace, but not at the same time that he's touching the mace, Tomas Shiva, even over there you're going to be Tameh for 7 days. V'yasa iyu, and then he came along, Yossi ben Yoezer ish Treda came along, v'yukma doraisa, and he said you go back to the doraisa halacha, that again, if it's shelo b'chiburin, it's just going to be a Tumas Erev. And the Gemara continues, doraisa mahi, where do we see this doraisa? Where do we see it in the Torah itself? T'chsiv, because it's written in the Torah, hanogeya b'meis l'chol nefesh adam v'tamei shivas yam. It says he touches a mace, he's 7-day tumah. Uchsiv v'chol asher yiga bo hatamei yitma, and then it says anyone who the tamei mace touches is going to be tamei. Uchsiv hanefesh hanogas titma ha'orav, and it says that's until evening. And so how do we explain this? Ha'ketzad, how so? Kan b'chiburin, kan shelo b'chiburin. We can understand the psukim. It seems to be a contradiction in psukim, but we can understand the psukim by saying that if it's b'chiburin, again, if you touch the person who's tamei mace while he's touching the mace, so then it's going to be 7 days. But if it's shelo b'chiburin, then it's just going to be yitma ad ha'orav, then it's only going to be until the evening. And Rashi explains, b'chiburin again means b'shosha yazen nogea b'meis, at the same time that this person is touching the dead body, b'chaveru v'nagabo, his friend comes and touches him. And shelo b'chiburin means la'achar shapirish min hameis, after he separates himself from the dead body, b'chaveru v'nagabo, his friend comes and touches him. And again, the contradiction in psukim, one of the psukim said, kol asher yigabo hatamei yitma, anyone who is touched by the tamei person, that's the person who touched the mace, touches someone else, is yitma. Rashi says, Shivas Yamim. That sounds like he's tamei for 7 days. Kistam Tumas Mace, like any other case of Tumas Mace. But yet again, the pasuk also seems to say that it's Tumas Erev, and so the answer was, in one case we're talking b'chiburin, and one case shelo b'chiburin. And the Gemara continues, Amar lehu Rava, Rava said to them, Lav amina lechu, didn't I tell you, lo tislu bebuke sriki b'Rav Nachman, don't hang empty pictures on Rav Nachman, you're not quoting Rav Nachman accurately. Hachi Amar Rav Nachman, this is what Rav Nachman actually said, Safik Tumah b'Rishos Haravim Hiter Lahen, the Yossi ben Yoezer ish Treda, what he actually permitted was, he said if you have a Safik situation of Tumah in Rishos Haravim, in the public domain, he said that is mutter. That's actually, that would be a leniency, that's something that he permitted, and that's actually what was being discussed. It had nothing to do with what we discussed above regarding Tamei Mace and Chiburin, etc. And the Gemara continues, Vahilchasa misota gamrin and lab. What are you talking about? That halacha of Safek Tumah b'Rishos Haravim, we're going to say is tahor, is pure. That's learned from Sota. We learn as follows: Masota Rishos Hayachid, just like the halacha or the concept of Sota, it all takes place in a private domain. That's the seclusion of the Sota. Av Tumah Rishos Hayachid, so too Tumah, we're strict in Rishos Hayachid and not in Rishos Haravim. And so the Gemara says to that, Ha'amar Rabbi Yochanan, no, Rabbi Yochanan said halacha ve'ein morin kain. That's true, but it's not something that we don't issue that ruling publicly. V'yasa iyu, and Yossi ben Yoezer ish Treda, he came along, v'yori le oruya, and he taught that halacha publicly again, that Safek Tumah and Rishos Haravim is mutter. And the Gemara says, Tanya Nami Hachu, we have a brisa like this as well. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, the brisa says that Rabbi Yehuda says, Koros noatz lohem, he put down beams in the ground. This is Yossi ben Yoezer ish Treda, in order to delineate where the Rishos Haravim ended. V'yamar adkan Rishos Haravim, adkan Rishos Hayachid. He said, until here is Rishos Haravim, until here is Rishos Hayachid. Kiyasu lakami de Rabbi Yanai, when they came before Rabbi Yanai, let's say somebody had a Safek Tumah in Rishos Haravim, and he came before Rabbi Yanai, Amar lahu, he would say to them as follows, Maya b'shikasa devenahara zilu tvulu. He said, there's water deep in the river, you might as well go and immerse. Meaning Rav Yanai felt it's a suffix situation, but it's one that's easily resolved if you immerse and purify yourself, and therefore you should be strict even in that situation. And Rashi explains, Buke Srike Kadim Reikim, again, that's empty pitchers. Kilomar Dvorim She'enon Tam. Everything you're saying is, these are ideas without reason behind them. Rather, Safek Tumah B'Rishas Harabim Hiter Lahem. Rather, Yossi ben Yoezer Ishtreda permitted Safek Tumah Rishas Harabim She'enam Nohagim Bo Iser V'Hachi Kamer. In other words, that we're not gonna conduct ourselves as a prohibition in that situation. V'Hachi Kamar. And what he was saying was as follows, meaning Yossi ben Yoezer Ishtreda was saying, V'Al Diyikrav Vadai L'Mesim Esav. What he meant to say was, if you touch a dead body with certainty, you're certain you touched the dead body, then you're tamei. Aval misafik lo, but in a situation of doubt, safik tumah rishos harabim, there you're not going to be tamei. Again, that was a leniency. The Gemara then asked, don't we learn that out from Sota? The tar that the person is pure. Because the whole idea of being strict by Safek Tumah we learn from Sota. Because the Torah uses a language of Tumah by Sota. And the Torah there by Sota is trying to say that there's a prohibition in a case of doubt. We learn from there the concept of saying by sheretz also that it's Tameh in a situation of doubt. And just like by Sota, we apply this specifically in the private domain. Sharei ain't stira b'rishas harabim, because there is no seclusion in the public domain. Af tumas safek b'sheretz ain't ala b'rishas hayachid b'Meseches Sota. So too, the tumas safek sheretz is specifically in rishas hayachid. That's in Meseches Sota. Halacha de v'safek tuma b'rishas harabim tar. And then the Gemara said this halacha that in safek tuma b'rishas harabim is tar. It's a halacha, however, ve'ein mor and b'rabim kain. We don't publicize it. To lo l'zalzlu batfei. We don't want people to treat tuma lightly or more lightly. And so then the Gemara said further, Koros noatz lohen. The Gemara brought the Braisa, in which Rabbi Yehuda said, Koros noatz lohen, that he put these beams into the ground. L'simonim bein rishos harabim. It was a sign to demarcate between rishos harabim uvein sados shel bika shein rishos hayachid, and between the fields that were in the valley, which is considered rishos hayachid l'tumah. As far as tumah is concerned, that's considered a rishos hayachid. Shabal asad makbid b'dris hasaregel. The whole point is there, the owner of the field, he doesn't want people walking through, so that's how you distinguish between rishos harabim and rishos hayachid. And Rashi continues and notes, V'yoda amrin b'hashutfin. Furthermore, we say in Hashutfin and Baba Basra, Dalid amos hasmuchos l'rishos harabim, 4 amos that are next to the rishos harabim. Kagon makam ponei hasamach l'rishos harabim. Let's say there's an open area near the rishos harabim, v'hu orach harbe, and it's very long. L'dalid amos harishonos. That first 4 amos rishos harabim l'tumah is considered to be rishos harabim as far as tumah is concerned. Uva'osan makomos noatz lenkor. So it was over there that he put these wooden beams in order to show what is rishos harabim and what is not in terms of tumah. And then the Gemara said, Kiyasu l'kami de Rabbi Yanai, when they came before Rabbi Yanai said, you might as well immerse. Meaning, Mi she'ira bo safek tumah b'rishos harabim, somebody who did have a safek tumah b'rishos harabim, Rabbi Yanai said, you might as well immerse and purify just in case. And the Gemara continues at the 2 dots. The Mishnah said, V'hashlokos, and food that was cooked by an ovid kochavim is forbidden. That's the idea of bishalakum. And the Gemara says, Menah immediately from where do we know this? Amar Reb Chiya bar Abba, Amar Reb Yochanan. Reb Chiya bar Abba says that Reb Yochanan says, Amar Kroetz, because the pasuk says, Ochel ba'kesef tashbireini v'ochalti. This is when Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to pass through the land of Sichon. He said, you'll sell me food and I will eat. Umayim ba'kesef titan li v'shasisi, and then water you'll give me for money and I'll drink. And so we compare the food from an ovid kochavim to the water from an ovid kochavim. Kamayim, the food is compared to the water. Ma'amayim shelo nishtanu, just like water is unchanged. Af ochel shelo nishtanu, so too the food has to be unchanged. But if it's cooked by the ovid kochavim, it's going to be aser. The Gemara says elamayata, but according to that, chitin vason kloyos. Let's say you have wheat and then you dry that wheat by roasting it. Hachinami dasurun, would that also be prohibited? Because that in that situation as well, that is something that was changed. If you're going to say that indeed is true, that we're going to say that is prohibited. But we learned in a brisa not like that. Chitin vason kloyos. Let's say the ovid kochavim has wheat and he made it into kloyos, which is dried grain. Mutar, and that is mutter. And so therefore, you can't say that the drasha simply is that it has to be changed. And so the Gemara instead says, Elakamayim, rather, what's permitted is it has to be like water. Ma'amayim shelo nishtanu mibriyasan, just like water, it wasn't changed from the way it was created, so too it has to be food. It has to be not changed from the way it was created. Meaning to say, when you have these wheat kernels and you just roast them, you don't fundamentally change them. That still is going to be something that is mutter. That's not going to be enough of a change. But the Gemara says, but according to that understanding, chitin v'tachnan. What about if you had wheat and you ground it? So that's already a change mibriyasan. So hachanami dasurn, would you say that that is something that is prohibited because it's not like water? V'chitemin, if you're going to say hachanami, indeed that's true, that's also asur. V'atanya, but again, we learned in a brayso, chitin v'asan kloyos, if you have wheat and you made it kloyos, again the dried grains, and hakamochim v'asiltos shalahan mutar, and also when it comes to their flour and their fine flour, that's also mutter, even though presumably that was changed mibriyasan. And so the Gemara again revises, ela rather kamayim, it's like water. Mamayim shalo nishtanu mibriyasan al yedei ha'or, just like water is not changed from the way it was created through fire, afochel shalo nishtanu mibriyasan al yedei ha'or, so too it has to be food that was not changed from how it was originally through fire, and therefore again it's specifically bishul akum that is prohibited. But the Gemara still asks, midi or ksiv, does it say anything in this pasuk about or, about a fire? And Rashi explains, Menah Hanimili, again, from where do we know to be shulei ovdei kochav masire, that which is cooked by idol worshippers is prohibited, and kloyos are yavshu betanor, again, kloyos are grains that are dried out in the oven, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Lamed Ches Amud Aleph.